So welcome to Women in Data Science 2. I'm so excited for this. My name is Mandy Trott. I'm co-founder for Women Data Scientists DC, and we're co-hosting this with Data Innovation DC. So how many of you came for Data Innovation DC? How many people came from Women Data Scientists DC? Wow. How many people came because I made you feel guilty for not coming? All right, excellent. So tonight, we as part of Data Innovation DC and Women Data Scientists DC are part of the Data Community DC, which are all these different organizations. Much better. All these different organizations, Data Science DC, Digital Nomads, Data Education DC, Data Biz DC, Data Wranglers DC, Statistical Programming DC, and of course, Data Innovation and Women Data Scientists. You can follow us at datacommunitydc.org and sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on Twitter, and there are plenty of other opportunities to be part of this community. Women Data Science DC is run by these three. Obviously, me, Jackie Puzzle, and Murad Hooker. And Data Innovation DC is run by Sean Murphy, Rebecca Bilbrow, Suzanne Sapala, Ed O'Brien, and Sophia Liu. And I believe Ed O'Brien is here. So this is the schedule for tonight. We're going to have our first speaker, and then we're going to have an intermission, and then our second speaker, and then a short break, question and answers, and then we'll all have some data drinks at 6:00. At 6:00. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Data Society, Continuum Analytics, AOL, Booz, Allen Hamilton, Georgetown University for this amazing space, and Hanover Research, and Meetup, who is providing the food for tonight. So I believe Hanover Research wanted to come up and talk a little bit about Hanover Research.
Hi everyone, my name is Arman Ghosh. I work in Hanover Research, and we have a few of my colleagues here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our company. We're a company of about 350 market research firm, 250 employees. We do a lot of, in our data analysis group, we do program evaluations, we do cluster analysis, we do predictive modeling. What I'm proud of is I lead a group of about 15 statisticians, and more than half of us are women. And even prouder of the fact that I'm not trying to hire women, I'm trying to hire the best people I can. So there's, we have some of our recruiters here, and if you want to just raise your hands and stuff our analysts, so come talk to us. We have some, some fun during this evening, and just want to thank you all for being here.
I also wanted to mention District Data Labs, who's one of our sponsors. And as you may have seen, the buttons outside talking about District Data Labs courses. The buttons will be back at the break. So feel free to stop by and press the button. And Sean Gonzalez, who's president of DC2, would like to come up and talk a little bit about an event that's going to happen soon called Datable.
No, just for those who were pressing it outside, I can bring up the website, but predictive modeling came first with 5 results, and the rest were 11 total votes. It's kind of a fun little way that we try to understand what's valuable for all you guys. And the other thing that we know is valuable to everybody here is jobs. So is anybody here hiring? Yes, well, I know you're hiring. Everybody here in the front row, who here is looking for a job? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, well, she pointed to somebody else. So this is the consistent thing we've gotten throughout the 4 years or however long it existed. So
Okay.
What?
Okay, you can write on the record board, just not on the screen.
Yes. So it's datable.org is the site. It's data.
Now you tell us.
So my question is, yeah, it's not a dating site. But obviously it catches the imagination. So the event will be in a month or so, and right now we've collected 70-something candidates, 50-something have responded to a full survey. A number of different companies are involved, and I think it was 60 or 70% have a master's or PhD. 30-something% are senior level or above. Half of them volunteer in the area. Many of them are organizers themselves. So 30-something have committed code today. 50-something have committed code in the last week. So it's a lot of really interesting people. And if you're interested, come and talk to me or go to the website.
Thanks, John. That's everybody. Thanks, Sean. So our first speaker ran Nokia's big data team, was named one of the 10 big data experts to know by Information Management, was listed as one of the 12 inspiring women in data science by Information Week, and currently is now Cloudera's big data evangelist. Please welcome Amy O'Connor.
So I just have to admit, I have to turn on my microphone, right?
Mhm.
Folks around here. How's that?
Much better.
Excellent. I rarely go to an event where the line in the ladies' room is longer than the line in the men's room. So I might find this to be a little bit challenging tonight, because I've been spoiled over the years, but I'm absolutely thrilled to see how many women are here and how many men are here in support of this event. So I think that's absolutely fabulous. Okay, great. So thank you for the introduction. I'll give you a little bit more background on myself. I work for Cloudera. We're one of the large Hadoop vendors. I spend my time traveling the world. I usually log more than 200,000 miles a year. I usually say I sit in 15A on American and 12F on United. But I really go out and I talk to our customers about how do they organize in order to take advantage of data. What do they need to do different? How do they go through a transition? I think a lot of you guys are already there because you're actually in some of these roles, but it's really amazing when you go around the world globally and you talk to customers in many different industries, the types of things that they're challenged with. So as Mandy mentioned, I came to Cloudera from Nokia, where I built and ran the big data team there. So I've been in a lot of your shoes. This was back in 2010. With Nokia obviously having gone through many challenges, missing kind of the smartphone thing and having to get into new businesses and selling part of the business to Microsoft. We went through a lot of different analysis of data in many different forms. We had, back in 2010, petabyte of data, 800 users, back when it was just MapReduce. So that was kind of the early days of Hadoop. What I'm going to talk about today are some high-level trends that I see happening globally that might give you some ideas for how to approach what you do a little bit differently. These high-level trends are impacting every business that I talk with. Lots of times it's kind of recognized at the C level that this is what's going on, but it's the data scientists that have to actually help find some of those questions that need to be answered in order to really make those trends be more seamless. So I'm going to kind of go through some of those high-level trends, and then I'm going to hit on a few practical things that I've seen work really well for data scientists to be more effective in what you're doing in your jobs. I did want to mention that my daughter is a data scientist. She works for Microsoft Azure. So we kind of have two in the family. I will admit I'm not the hands-on one anymore, so I watch her do her stuff over there. She's in Dubai at a bunch of customer sites right now. We did a talk at Strata Hadoop World a couple of years ago entitled Breeding Data Scientists, and we're doing version 2 of that talk, which is, it sounds it's a funny name, but the whole idea is, where do data scientists come from, and how do you really evolve them over time? What's changed from when we did that talk a couple of years ago to what we're going to do in that talk this year. A couple of things that I really wanted to mention is that in just digital technology in the past 2 decades, there have been so many changes that have happened, and it's really only in the past 5 years where we've been able to go from kind of sample size to using data in new ways, and there are a lot of technologies underneath that have enabled that to happen. I'll point out that my titles, I'm known as AMIO in the industry. I made up that title, Big Data Evangelist. It's always cool when you can make up your own title. Also, at some point in time when I kind of went from writing code to asking questions around why are we writing this code anyways and who's going to use this code, and I did that transition into management, that's when I became known as the geek in high heels. So that's where that stuff comes from. I wanted to point out a couple different things. So first of all, in our world, change has always been constant, but I think we all know that the pace of change is really increasing rapidly, and that change can cause disruption, and disruption's a really good thing because it creates opportunities. And it's the companies that recognize that those disruptions are creating opportunities. They're the ones that are successful. We kind of even joke sometimes at Cloudera about how we think we could create a mutual fund of companies that we see investing in data scientists and data. And we think they will be the ones who will be successful versus the ones who are kind of still stuck in their old ways. And you can kind of see those two different curves. The incumbents have a lot of trouble really basically saying, I'm going to take a risk with my current business and try to do something different. And that's a challenge for a data scientist to help to really expose some of the things that could be doing differently. Because a lot of companies will hold on to their current cash cows and not make a change towards some new way of approaching their customers, some new way of creating their products and services and getting them to market and creating those full feedback loops, some new ways of protecting their companies with cybersecurity and against risk. So this curve is much more applicable now than it even was back a few decades ago, because the compression, the time that the changes are happening in this curve are much more quick because of the amount of data and the types of analysis that can be done today. So, a couple other notes here. Henry Ford, he said if he had listened to his customers, he just would have made a better horse. You've probably heard that one. I put the note here on the side of Reed Hastings. This was when Netflix was going from DVDs to streaming. And he really recognized that he was going to cannibalize his existing business, but he had to make that change. Steve Jobs said he felt his customers had no idea what products they even wanted until they saw those products. So that takes a lot out of the, just getting information from people and turning around and creating businesses from it. It really requires new ways of looking at things and throwing innovation and imagination into everything that you're doing. So what do these 3 groups of companies have in common? We've got Group A, which has things like American Motors and Studebaker. Group B, Boeing, Campbell Soup, General Motors, and Group C, Facebook, eBay, and Home Depot. Back in 1955, that's when the Fortune 500 was first established. And if you actually look at it, there's been a lot of change in the Fortune 500, and that change has accelerated over the past few years. So again, companies that are not disrupting themselves, that are not looking for those opportunities, those companies are really falling by the wayside. And Group C is every year there's new companies that emerge on the Fortune 500 as other companies fall off. And even in this past year, there were 17 companies that fell off the Fortune 500 list. And a lot of them, a few just got too small. Some had to do with mergers and acquisitions. And there's a whole new range of companies that come along. And they're not, a data-driven company that's in a particular industry. They really are across all industries: media, financial services, insurance. But those are the companies that are actually doing new and innovative things with data. And they're really getting themselves further up the list than they would have otherwise. Okay, so you guys know this, but the technology that's really disrupting the industry falls into 5 main buckets. I pictured 4 of them here. The first is this whole concept of Internet of Things, and the whole micro-electromechanical devices that are in all of the sensors. The pricing in those has dropped 30 to 70% in the past 5 years. That's why we're now able to instrument things, so that we can get data from sensors from things that are all around the world. You've probably heard some of the numbers where folks like IDC and Cisco say, there'll be 20 billion of these out by 2020, or 30 billion of these, and there's trillions of actual things that could be instrumented with sensors. So up until about a year ago, the majority of data that we were all dealing with was really data that was created by people talking to people. It was really social types of data. And it's rapidly emerging to the majority of data is really coming from machines talking to machines. So that's going to change what all of us do over the course of the next couple of years. It's going to change where we do that analysis, because some of it is. It's going to change how we do some of that analysis and what that analysis means. The second piece that's really enabled this change is Hadoop. And I find it interesting. It kind of feels like we've been working with Hadoop for just a short while, and it still is this new thing. But it's actually been out in the market for 10 years now. And the rapid change in the Hadoop ecosystem is something that we haven't seen. We've been trying to do a comparison of it to what happened with kind of Linux and Red Hat, and haven't come up with a great good comparison yet. But I'll tell you a few things. Back when Hadoop first came out, obviously through the papers written at Google and the implementation at Yahoo out into open source, and then Cloudera was the first company to commercialize it. In the first instances, you really were able to do batch processing. And it did batch processing over much larger sets of data because it was using commodity type storage, and because it was parallel, it was able to do it in a very, very fast way. Well, since then, that ecosystem has evolved so quickly. There are now many, many different ways that you can ingest data into the system. You can still ingest it from a batch perspective. You can do this from the perspective of something that's much more streaming in real time. So there's lots of different ways to get data into this technology now. There are lots of different types of products and tools that you can do to process the data. I think there's some folks here that talked about themselves as being data wranglers, which I think is one of the most important jobs in the world, the people that get the data into the state so that it can be used by other folks. And there are also lots of different ways to analyze the data. And finally, lots of different ways to serve the data. So we're no longer dealing with systems that are for business intelligence. We're dealing with systems that are full cycle, full feedback loop, allow you to ingest data from things, do the analysis of that data, come up with some insights, serve those insights back to the business however they need to be served, whether it is a business intelligence report or whether it's back to a mobile or an enterprise or a web-based application. So that part of the technology has changed so much. It's enabling people to do a lot of different things. The company I work for, we have about 1,200 employees. We have 2,400 IT partners. Usually a startup company struggles to get a couple of people to sign up to their partner list. What that says to me is the entire IT industry, everywhere you look across the board, everyone's basically saying the core of the data center is going to change towards data. And that's why every IT vendor is on this bandwagon of how do they hook to these big data systems. And over time, all of these different vendors are doing different things to enable them to work much better in this parallel processing Hadoop ecosystem. The third area is just chips themselves. I was recently reading an article in The Economist that was talking about Moore's Law. Moore's Law is no longer keeping up with itself, which really means that, well, what are these processing companies going to do? So they can no longer produce faster chips at a state cheaper the way that they have been over the course of the past 20 years. So what's happening is all of the companies that are building chipsets and building ASICs are now starting to build specialized ones. I don't know if you saw in the past week at the Google I/O conference, they announced their TPU, their tensor processing unit, that's really all about accelerating machine learning. You've got Intel starting to produce 3D memory chips that are going to enable you to do a lot more in memory. You've also got Intel building math coprocessors. So you guys are going to see over time that, instead of going from really using general purpose commodity hardware, it'll still be commodity hardware, but some of the chipsets are going to actually accelerate the things that you're doing. There's also acceleration in these chips around authentication. So I know I talked to a couple of you that work in the cybersecurity area. And so authentication is a huge thing there, and Intel's actually started to build some of that software down into the chip. And also in the area of encryption, because again, for protecting data, you really want to be encrypting the data, yet there's a performance hit when you encrypt and decrypt data. So a lot of that's being done down on the chipset. So the software is changing, and the software is being pushed down into the hardware, which is really going to enable you guys to do even more. And then the fourth area is just software in general and machine learning in particular. There are so many more tools now to be able to do machine learning type of algorithms. I know a lot of you probably use Scala or Java on Spark. There's a lot of R that's typically used, SAS. So there's a lot of tools that are out there today. We're going to see the ISV vendors eventually step up and invest more in that space to make your jobs easier. And that, we'll kind of get to some of this later on in the talk, which means that, for you should keep ahead of that tool curve. So make sure you're always aware of what's happening with these vendors so that your job continually gets easier and you're getting to the answers you want to get to, as opposed to still struggling with tools. So a lot of changes happening in that space. The fourth one I didn't put a picture of is just obviously the cloud. The cloud is making a lot of things much easier, a lot easier to start up projects, to test things out. I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see an awful lot of government interaction with private entities with respect to privacy, with respect to sovereignty, with respect to where is data generated, is it generated in the cloud, does it move somewhere else, can it be stored in the cloud? I work with a lot of companies that are European. In the EU, there are an awful lot of regulations around not letting certain types of data cross country boundaries. So even kind of when we think about this wonderful new technology, there still are a lot of practicalities around it that are going to constrain how we need to think about using those technologies. So that said, those technologies are driving three major areas of convergence in the world. From these three major areas of convergence, I think when you think about what you do in your daily life, you'll see that they have an impact of what's already happening, but also it may give you some ideas as to how you can approach the problem sets that you're dealing with a little bit differently. So obviously the first one is this, the whole work-life balance thing that we've been talking about for years. It just doesn't exist anymore, and I'm going to go through examples of that. And then the second area is really around industrial convergence. These very siloed vertical industries, they also don't exist anymore. And then the final area is the convergence of the virtual world that a lot of us have spent time in over the past decade or so, with the emergence of a lot of social media and places to exist with people virtually that really had been separate from the physical world, and that's another area of convergence. So the first one is just, so mobility, 7x24 connectivity. I don't know about you guys, but I work in a global company. You know, email never stops, HipChat never stops, Slack never stops. It's just continual. So whatever time you happen to go to bed, whatever time you get up, you're already behind because there's been a bunch of people somewhere else in the world that need something from you. So mobility, this constant on the global economy, they put pressures on us from the perspective of how do we actually run our lives? And there are two things to think about here. One is, how do we survive in these types of environments when our lives are so intertwined, our personal and professional lives are so intertwined? But the other part to think about is the things that you're creating as you're building data science applications, how can you be building them in ways that enable your customers, your consumers, the people in your business to have a better work-life blend, if we'll say it that way. And one of the reasons why this happened is you kind of look at the emergence of all this technology over the years, you know, from the telephone to the radios, then up through all those funky things like VCR. Most of you are too young to remember that, but nobody could ever even get the time correct on a VCR. When you kind of look at these, you'll see that television was adopted very, very quickly from a household perspective, but then when you go all the way up to the right-hand side, you'll see that the tablet and the smartphone went in the US to 40% adoption in a matter of 3 years. And the one difference there too is that's from an individual perspective, where all of the rest of the things underneath it are from a household perspective. And one of the things that I find fascinating about this diagram is really, if you take the top 3 things out, between the tablets, the smartphones, and the internet, they've subsumed everything else that happened before. So in reality, you don't need any of the rest of these inventions because you have the tablet, the smartphone, and the internet. And then that kind of brings you back to that whole idea of starting to converge those industrial worlds. I love asking this question. How many of you guys sleep with your smartphone? I actually do that sometimes. You know, so I actually find that men always ask, what does that mean? How close does it have to be to be sleeping with your smartphone? So I didn't see all that many hands here. Sleeping with your smartphone, by this definition, is kind of within arm's reach. It's charging by the side of your bed. So let me ask it again. How many of you guys sleep with your smartphones? Okay. So 71% of Americans sleep with their smartphones. And 35%, according to a Bank of America survey, said that the first thing they thought of in the mornings is their smartphone. 10% said the first thing they thought of was their life partner. So, anyways, I kind of do think about my smartphone. But when you basically combine that with the fact that 40% of US consumers are now using their smartphones at work, so this whole concept of bring your own device to work is not really very old. It's only about, I'd say, 6-7 years old now. But most folks are bringing their smartphones to work. So talk about work-life blending, right? You know, one of the first things that you do is pick up your phone and kind of check on things, look at your schedule, what's going to happen for the day, probably see a couple of those emails that came in overnight and maybe do a quick response or what am I going to do about those types of emails. So this work-life blend is really happening. And that's why I really like this quote from Steve Jobs. You know, I think Steve Jobs was probably doing work-life blend, you know, way back when, before a lot of us were thinking about it. But he's basically saying that, you know what, you really need to do great work, and the way to do great work is to love what you're doing. And if you don't love what you're doing, you should continue looking. I would really augment that with, if you don't love what you're doing, there are ways to change what you're currently doing to make it different, to make it so that you love it. With this work-life blend, with that smartphone, being next to the bed, with the integration of the way our lifestyles work. It's really important for people to have much more passion about what they're doing and really be interested in what's happening there. So the two opportunities out of this big trend towards this work-life blend are, one, just an opportunity for each one of us personally to really ensure that we're working with the right people on the right stuff, because there's no longer your personal life and your professional life, it's your life. And so it's really important to be really happy in those two things that you do. Not ecstatic every day, because we all have those coworkers, that drive us nuts, but really kind of happy directionally in what you're doing. And as I mentioned, the other thing is, as we're building things with data, it's really important to keep this in mind. Some of the most successful companies are the ones that have started to build products. A lot of the cloud-based products, a lot of the consumer electronic products are the products that do transcend that boundary from a personal life to a professional life. And that's a trend that's not going away. So as you think about what it is you're doing, no matter what industry that you happen to be in, that's a really important consideration to determine how can you build things in a better way to make that blend of work-life work much, much better. So that kind of brings us to this idea of the vertical industries converging. So this is Nicholas Negroponte. He was the director of the media labs at MIT up in Boston. And way back in 1980, right? So way back, he really came up with this idea that content industries, computing industries, communications industries were going to converge. I think we all know that, right? That's actually what happened. If you even look at what's happened in the past week, Comcast is buying DreamWorks. Verizon is one of the top bidders on Yahoo. So all of the infrastructure companies that really owned the network underneath, they're buying up media because the value is actually in the media that runs on top of these things. So that was one major change that absolutely happened. Yet it's now happening in every other industry. And here's just another very simple example. So if you look at medicine, manufacturing, and media today, and you think about medicine in particular, and just in the past 6 months, there have been so many changes that have happened with respect to how many different research arms of hospitals are really analyzing the genome and all the other omics that I don't know the names of, but really analyzing all of the omics to figure out what kind of changes could be made, what kind of predictors could happen after them to get to this whole concept of precision medicine. So what is that? That's media, right? They're working with data in order to really start to do medicine in a much different way. I don't know about you guys, but a few people in my family have had to spend extended periods of time in hospitals up until a couple of years ago, and it was not a great experience. It's a little bit of a, let's try a little of this and try a little of that. And I think we're now finally getting to the point in medicine where we're going to be able to do things that are a bit more personalized with results that we can actually measure. So one is with the genome, but the other one is in the area of manufacturing. We work with Intel and the Michael J. Fox organization on Parkinson's research. And Parkinson's is a very debilitating disease, and everyone that has it has really a different progression. So what typically happens is that a doctor prescribes a particular type of medication, and it's up to the patient to really log how do they feel every day, what is their gait like, what's changed in the way that they feel and how they're able to move. And in this research that we're doing with Intel and the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Foundation, what we've done is instrument thousands of patients with various different wearables, and so that we can record thousands of measurements off of them every minute or so, which really gives you a data set. Now think about how valuable that data set is versus that diary that you would have gotten from a patient. So just in the area of one particular disease like Parkinson's research, you can just imagine the impact that the convergence of these three different areas is going to have. I'll tell you that I have not run across any customer in any industry, in any country around the globe that has not broken down a barrier to an industry that's adjacent to them. In Mexico, for example, the largest retailer has just opened up a financial services arm so they can offer credit to people. They just bought a spectrum of telecommunications bandwidth so that they can also retail sell, hey, here's your cell phone service. So we're seeing this across the board in absolutely every single industry. And then there's these new weird industries, right? So this whole idea that the biggest Fortune 500 companies were the ones that owned the most capital equipment. How strange is this, right? The world's largest taxi company has no vehicles. The most popular media owner, the top two, they own no content. The most valuable retailer has no inventory, and the largest accommodation provider owns no real estate. So this is just mind-blowing. These are very large, successful companies that are doing something different, and basically what they're doing is they're doing it with data. There's a really interesting book, if you get the chance to read it, Capitalism in the 21st Century. There's a lot of discussion about this, about who's going to end up owning the capital equipment in this world and how much of it is going to be leased. We work with some very large car manufacturers, and they're obviously all into the connected car and entertainment systems, predictive maintenance, GPS navigation, all the things that you think about when you think about one of those great cars, automatic driving and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that they're also thinking about is the fact that they believe many consumers will no longer want to purchase a car, that they're going to want to lease a car. So this concept of even kind of an Uber or a Lyft or a Zip car is going to get to the next step where a lot of individuals just will not be interested in owning some of the capital goods. They're much more looking towards really leasing or sharing capital goods. So I think we're seeing an emergence of some very large entities that are owning capital equipment, and also some very large businesses that are moving away from capital equipment. And quite frankly, cloud is a perfect example of it. Every large enterprise had their own set of data centers. And now most companies that basically say, hey, you know what? I'm not really an IT company. Why do I need to own a data center? They're moving to a cloud. That's an exact trade-off between CapEx and OpEx. So this is another huge change that's happening in the world. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it's going to have some pretty major impact, I would imagine, in every single company you guys work for, and the company I work for, and the way that we run our daily lives. And so the last major trend is that just this convergence of the virtual and the physical worlds. As I said, up until a year ago or so, they really were pretty different. You had your kind of online persona and the people that you interacted with there, and then you had where you went physically and what you did physically. With the price of the MEMS devices that are inside all the sensors dropping so drastically, people can now instrument the physical world with these sensors so that we'll be able to get data off the physical world. And what that's really enabling is for us to have a much different experience with how we navigate the physical world and how we use the resources around us. When's the last time anyone ever opened up a map book? That was something that even 10 years ago people continued to do. So the smart cities, by 2030, they say that 60% of the world's population is going to live in cities. You think about the strain that puts on a city from the perspective of safety and health and convenience and navigation. That's a huge area for data to make a tremendous difference. Otherwise, these cities just simply will not work. I listed some of the other areas. I mean, everybody's talking about Internet of Things. When I think of Internet of Things, I think about it as just being more devices that are capturing more data, and it actually impacts everything that we do. Precision medicine. Now, I mentioned the Michael J. Fox thing, but really starting to instrument the body in a way that you get more data off the body in order to be able to come up with better care paths. I call it precision energy. I kind of made that term up. But obviously we have limited natural resources on our planet that we're using and we're consuming in order to keep ourselves warm and cold and comfortable and all the rest of those things. And we need to figure out much better ways of really using those natural resources. So precision energy, the simple things that we have today where you start to meter the thermostat in your house, and kind of know when you should be turning it down and turning it up and those kinds of things. That's one very small piece of it, but we're working with large well drillers who are looking at more efficient ways to drill wells by putting sensors in the equipment and knowing how far down they need to go and what's happening with those. A lot of the gas lines have very manual ways that it's something, I think it's called a pig. It's something that they put in a gas line to actually figure out where a leak might be in the line. Whereas they can start to instrument some of these gas lines so that they can actually find these leaks much more, so things will be safer and more quick, and quite frankly, much cheaper. Automated logistics. So there are now, there's a trucking company in Europe that is testing driverless trucks across Europe. There's a lot of things that are happening with respect to, logistics is really like moving something that's created somewhere to somewhere else where it might be needed. And there's a lot of things that are involved in that in order to keep whatever's being moved in its appropriate state, get it there as quickly as can, as cheaply as can. So logistics is a huge area as well. 3D printing. How many things do we kind of need and order in our lives that could actually be printed much more closer to where we are, so you actually don't have to truck them from somewhere else, which will change a lot of the dynamics. And then the last two is virtual reality and augmented reality. I'm a firm believer we're going to see a lot in the area of virtual reality in the next 5 years, which kind of brings you back to that interface between your virtual and your physical life, that you'll be able to interact with people in a very kind of human-like way, but through some virtual technology. And augmented reality, there's a lot of things that are already happening. This is a poster in the UK. They're trying to get folks to donate blood. And so what they're doing with this poster is they've got folks who, it's a billboard, they've got folks who are around the area, and they basically give you an iPhone and you kind of like scan the iPhone over where the injection would be for you to donate blood. And as you do that, on the billboard itself, you'll actually see the blood bag fill up and you'll see the person who's on the billboard look much more healthy. So it's an augmented reality thing, but it's a way for them to really incent people to sign up to be blood donors. It's a really simple example, but one of the first ones that's really out there. So I'm going to switch from those broad topics that, hopefully give you some ideas about, certainly any of you that are in data and data science will realize from those broad themes that you're going to have jobs for the next couple decades. So no worries on that one. There is plenty to do here. There is plenty of opportunity. If the business that you're in isn't doing this stuff, you've got to get to them and talk to them more about it. Or quite frankly, step to the side to the next business over, because there are companies all over the place that are dying for the skill sets that are in this room to be able to do this stuff. So I thought I would hit on just a couple tactical practices for the data practitioner. Am I over time a little bit? Food is here. Oh, I'll talk much faster because food is here. Okay, so when I go out and I talk to companies, there are a couple key things that we always tell their data scientists that they should do. Some of this is based on my own personal experience, some based on things we've learned from people. So I'll blast through these really fast. I'm sure most of you use agile methodology, this whole concept of fail fast, iterate really well. So I'm going to go through this example really quickly. Back in 1959, there was this Kramer Prize for who could build the first man-powered plane. And, kind of just run this really quick loop. So there were a bunch of different people, different universities got involved, they built planes. In the next 15 years, there were 20 different design teams. They built 27 planes that managed to crash all over the place and didn't get very far at all. So then this guy comes along, Dr. Paul McCready, and he basically says, I'm going to use aluminum tubing, plastic sheeting, piano wire, and Scotch tape, of all things. And so he basically cobbled together this plane, but what his idea was, when it crashed, he could easily put it back together because he wasn't creating these very elaborate things. He was using these very small raw materials. He was checking things out. In the course of the next year, his pilot ran 223 flights, as opposed to, remember, for the past 15 years, they'd only run 27 flights total. So we ran 223 flights by being able to be incredibly iterative and agile and using these raw materials that were readily available. That's lesson number one. Be iterative. Always think about being iterative. Always think about whatever you've already done, how can you use it to do the next thing much more quickly. The second piece is kind of communication. I have found in my work, a lot of data scientists would be really happy to kind of show you really long lists of data, and it's usually got exponentials in it, and they're like, wow, cool, look what I found. And you look at it like, ooh, no idea, sorry. So visualizations are really vitally important. Sometimes it feels like at the end of kind of an agile sprint or going through some work, to spend a little bit of extra time to build a cool little visualization is a little bit of a waste. I will tell you, I find it to be one of the most powerful things across every company. So grab an open source tool, build a nifty cool visualization, show one thing, give it to an executive, and that executive is going to go running for the hills and shouting from the mountaintops about how cool you are and all the great things that you built. Privacy, ethics, and fairness. This recent, very interesting, well, given that I'm in DC, it's really interesting thing about the Republican Party basically saying that they felt Facebook was really kind of weeding out some of the more conservative things. So privacy, ethics, and fairness are some things that you need to keep into your thought process every day. We could talk for hours about that, and we won't. I just thought that this was a great example because what Mark Zuckerberg did is he said, somebody's having a problem with what we're doing. I'm going to talk to them about it, and I'm going to make sure that we're sticking to, and I love this, the integrity of our products. And so that means that people inside the company need to understand what are our privacy policies, what are our ethical policies, what is it that we have published that we're doing, and that are we adhering to those things. And as I said, we could talk about this for hours. I see this particular area being one for the next 10 years. It's going to go all over the map with respect to what we need and don't need to do. And I'm on my last concept, which is just as a data scientist, with the change, with the pace of change in this world, with everything that's going on, with the tool sets that you're using, with what you're learning, with what the open source communities are doing, be a continuous learner because everything's constantly changing. So always keep yourself with the work you're doing and always know the very next thing that's coming out so that you, because that opportunity, as I said, this is a multi-decade opportunity to use data to do all these things, but keep yourself ahead of that learning curve so that you're the one who's really always pushing the envelope to get to the next thing. And so final slide is just our tagline at Cloudera is ask bigger questions. It's one of the reasons why I really love working there. Google has done a great job with getting everybody really easy, cheap answers at your fingertips. I mean, just imagine you used to have to go to the library and look things up, and then you still couldn't find them. And now you can quickly just talk into your phone and it gives you the answer. So the answer is no longer the thing that's so critical. What's becoming much more critical, in particular for a group of folks like you, is what are those next set of questions that you should be asking? What are those next set of things that if you ask of the data and you really wrangle it out of the data, that you're going to find some new and innovative things that enable all the things I talked about earlier. With that, I will pass it off back to Mandy so we can have food.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker has done some amazing research in artificial intelligence, multi-agent planning and learning. She's a professor in computer science and electrical engineering at UMBC, and she's part of the advisory board for UMBC's Women in Technology. She's also the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Engineering and Information Technology. Please welcome Dr. Marie Desjardins.
Thank you. So I know I need to turn this on. Everybody can hear me? I'll try not to yell because I know it's really pretty loud. So I am Marie Desjardins. I wrote down a couple of notes while Amy was talking because I wanted to differentiate myself from her so you wouldn't get us mixed up. So first of all, I don't sleep with my smartphone. I don't wear high heels, just the flats. Although I love the rainbows. I'm going to get me some rainbow flats. And my daughters aren't data scientists. I have one daughter in medical school and the other daughter wants to be a veterinarian. So, you know, it's okay. So I just want to share a little bit about myself and who I am. I grew up in Maryland. I actually went to Wildlife High School in Howard County. Folks here, yay, woohoo! Way back when it was a different building. We were one of the early families in Columbia. So I grew up in this very, very integrated little liberal bubble. And then I went out into the world and I'm like, whoa, people don't treat each other very nicely out here. And it was kind of a shock to the system. But, you know, I think it was actually a great upbringing because it really gave me this perspective on people and tolerance and togetherness and sort of respecting all types of people and different kinds of people being able to live together and work together. And that's been something that I've brought to my career throughout my life. So I went away to college, computer scientist. I went to grad school. I got my PhD from Berkeley and stayed out in the Bay Area for about 10 years after that, working at a nonprofit research institute called SRI International, which was a great place to be, especially when I was having kids, and it was very flexible work environment, and I learned a lot there, and then decided to go back to academia and came to UMBC in 2001, so I've been there for almost 15 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences in academia and as a computer scientist a little bit later in the talk. But my research is in artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning. So that's kind of my connection to data science. And I actually spoke at the first Women in Data Science meetup, I guess it was a couple years ago now. And thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed that event a lot. And this turnout is terrific. And it's really great to see the Women in Data Science group that's formed. So I also wanted to mention that one of my interests right now as Associate Dean is in predictive analytics for student success. And we're really looking to see which students succeed in our computing and engineering majors and what are the factors that lead to success or lead to stepping off the pathway, and what can we do to intervene earlier to help students get into the right major and also succeed in the major they really want to be in. And I was really I was kind of struck by the quote that Amy gave us of Henry Ford, that if I listened to my customers, I would have built a better horse. And I think one of the things that we understand and know is that if we listen to what the students want, that would probably get us a lot of not very educated students coming out the door. You know, all this learning, make it stop. So we have to look at different kinds of performance metrics than, you know, what's traditionally done is you ask students, how do you like this class? And that's your measure of success. If your students like the class, then somehow that means you're being successful. And while it's nice to have your students like the class, that doesn't always correlate with performance, with outcomes. And so thinking about, like, what does our data mean and what is it really telling us, and what are the performance indicators that we're looking to maximize? I think all those questions are so interesting. And I'm not going to talk about anything technical like that today. Instead, I'm going to talk about, I thought since it's a Women in Data Science meetup, I might talk about women in data science. So that's where I'm going to go, and I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit and talk some about underrepresentation issues and you know, kind of where I see those causes and possible solutions. And then I want to talk about a couple of issues, sort of a little bit more of a mentoring, cheerleading kind of thing about what are some of the issues that I think women in data science tend to face. So women in computing. Computer science education is really a national crisis right now, not just from a gender issue, but really from all perspectives. We have so much demand for computer scientists, and we're not generating enough computer science trained computer scientists to meet the demand. So there's really kind of a jobs crisis. There are actually more new jobs in computing projected for the next 10 years than in all other STEM areas combined. And yet, until very recently, when people talked about STEM education, they mostly were really talking about SME education, right? Science and math, right? Physics, biology, chemistry, math. That's what STEM is to most K-12 educators. That's what they think of when they think of STEM, and when we invest in STEM, it tends to go into those traditional physical and life sciences and mathematics. And so it's really relatively recently that there's been an emphasis on technology, engineering, computing, and particularly at the K-12 level. So we're playing so much catch up. And this is actually an international challenge. I think the United States is ahead of some countries, but way behind a lot of countries. In England, every first grader learns how to program. So imagine that. You know, what would you be doing now if you had started programming in first grade? Like, what would you be able to do? And I think about that, and I think about how challenging it is as a college professor to get students to succeed in computer science. Well, why is that? And I think, well, how hard would it be if you were an English professor trying to graduate students with a degree in English, and when they got to you, they didn't know how to read or write? Wow. You know, that's sort of where we are. Most students coming into college have no computer science training. And so we're starting from nothing and trying to get quite far. And I know I talked to a couple of you who are either in the process of or have retrained into data science, into computer science from a different area. And we do all of this sort of so late because people are late figuring out that this is a potential career path, and so we need to do better earlier. Enrollments were dropping for about 10 years. In the 2000s, after the dot-com bust, everybody thought, oh, there's no jobs, they're all going overseas, don't major in this, run away, run away. Well, actually, there was never a loss of jobs. Despite the dot-com bubble and a few very prominent companies tanking, there were always jobs. But the perception was that there weren't jobs. And so students were really moving away from those fields, and enrollments were dropping dramatically. And then they started going back up around 2007. I could tell you when they started going up because I was undergraduate program director of computer science at UMBC. And one semester we noticed that all of our sections of our introductory discrete math were full with waiting lists. This has never happened before. I was like, well, this is weird. I guess maybe we'll make some of the sections a little bigger. I wonder if this is going to keep happening. Well, here we are a couple of years later, and it's still happening. So I have a few statistics. At UMBC in 2008, we had about 1,400 students who had a declared major in computer science, computer engineering, or information systems, or business technology administration. So those are our four computing-related majors. We now have almost 2,500 students, which is an increase of 64% in 7 years. So it's just phenomenal. I mean, this is unprecedented. And nationally, the numbers are actually even bigger, depending on the source you look at. It's going to be a little bit hard to measure because how do you count and where do you count? This is one from one particular source. But if you look at the number of majors, it's up 125% over that same period of time. So 2.25 times as many majors as 7 years ago, and 71% more as many graduates. And partly that's because students drop out more. Partly it's because there's just a trailing edge to that trend that's still climbing. The enrollments are still climbing. We've actually, this past year, we had 10% more students than the year before. It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. And so universities are scrambling to kind of meet this demand. So this is great. This is the really good news because we need this. We need this to be happening. We don't know how to deal with it. There's too many students. We don't know how to teach them all. We don't know how to get them into the classes. I mean, there's some real challenges, but it's a good challenge, right? This is a challenge that we want to have. Here's the not so great news. So these statistics are from 2 different years because I didn't have this, it's not the same source, but about half of all undergraduate degrees in STEM go to women. That's great. I mean, that's actually very different than, when I was in college. It's equalized. That's wonderful. However, in computer science, 12%. 12%. When I was in college, which is a really long time ago, early 80s, 35% of students graduating with degrees in computer science were women. It's a third as many as that now. So it's not just that the percentage of women didn't go up like it did in all of the other STEM fields. It went down, and it went way down. And actually, I thought it was going back up. It seemed like it was maybe ticking back up. It's not. It hasn't gone up ever. Like not since, not since it started dropping. So it's frustrating and perplexing and really discouraging at times, because I think there's no reason for this, right? I mean, there's just no reason at all. And nothing against men. Men are great, but so are women. And, I mean, a lot of men are really good at computer science, but so are a lot of women. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a lot of cultural factors that go into this. So, and by the way, the numbers, the underrepresentation is almost as striking for underrepresented minority groups, particularly African Americans and Hispanics. So you have an underrepresentation relative to the population of a factor of about 4 for female undergraduates, and it's also a factor of 3 to 4 for Black students and for Hispanic students. So this is a problem of perception and of culture. So what's going on? Here's a set of things, and I think there's a confluence of a set of factors that have led to the current situation. So one is a chicken and egg problem, right? And this it's a feedback loop, right? So the fewer women there are, the fewer women there are. Because it's really hard to be a minority. I don't know, I mean, there's a couple men in this room. I don't know if you feel uncomfortable at all. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You don't have to say. I can tell you that when I walk into a conference and there's a room with 100 men in it and me and 2 other women, I don't like it. I do it all the time, but I still don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable, it makes me sad, it makes me feel like I somehow don't quite belong there, even though I know damn well I belong there. I mean, look at me, I know I belong there, but it doesn't feel good, So there's just a problem, and when you feel like an outsider, anything that goes wrong is going to push you off of that path, right? So it's harder to walk into that room, and it's harder to stay there. In college, the guys tend to get together into study groups and know each other and network and hang out together and do their thing, and that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's human nature. But if you've only got 3 women in the class, it's hard for them to do that. And by the way, if they do that, the guys are all looking at them like, well, why are the girls all hanging out together? Because they notice. It doesn't occur to them that the guys are all hanging out together too. Nobody notices that because they're the majority. There's a climate problem, and there's a lot of evidence to support that there's a climate problem, and that the way people are treated in general and the way women are treated in particular drives women out of the field. And it doesn't take that much is the thing. Right? It's like, oh, that's just a little thing, that's a little thing. But and I'm not super crazy about the word microaggression. It's not my favorite word. It's not my favorite concept, but I do think, these little things that seem little aren't always little to you. And when they start to add up and then you get one more of them, it's like, the heck with it, I'm not dealing with this anymore. And we see women leaving the tech fields in much higher numbers than men. Much higher numbers. So women who graduate with a degree in computer science are far less likely to still be in computing and technology 10, 20 years later than men are. There's confidence issues, and this is a social issue across everything in our society, that women are, because of a lot of reasons in our society, women have less confidence than men do, and that again exacerbates problems. And I should say, if it's not obvious, not every single woman in the world, not every single man in the world, right? But on average, there are performance perceptions, and these are really, really insidious, because they're not overt, they're hard to measure, they're hard to even notice, and it's hard to understand just how severe these kinds of things can be. But women tend to underestimate their performance on most things, particularly on things that they think they're not supposed to be good at because they're a woman. And here's a really interesting study. I've seen several studies, and I've seen this both with minorities, with African Americans, and with women, that if you take a member of either of those groups and you sit them down and you give them a math test or a physics test, and at the beginning of the test you ask them their race or you ask them their gender, and then you have them take the test, and you compare that to a group of black students or women who are not asked that question, and you have them take the same test, that second group does much better than the first group. Not just a little bit better, but much better than the first group. Because that question triggers a stereotype, right? This is called stereotype threat. It triggers a stereotype and it tells you, it activates a part of your brain that says, I don't belong here and I'm not really supposed to be good at this. Well, guess what? If you're told you're not supposed to be good at something, you're not going to be good at it. It turns out the same study has been done with white men, asking them their race just before a math test. And one of the choices there is Asian. And white men don't do as well. So you can activate any kind of stereotype by bringing attention to it. And so these stereotype threats are very real, and they influence your behavior even when you're not aware of them, right? So you have to make yourself aware of them, because that's the only way to stop it, is to be aware of those things and to ask yourself, am I thinking about this way because I'm not supposed to be here, because I'm getting a message, because there's something cultural going on? The other thing is women are less likely to be perceived as competent by both men and women, and this has been shown in a lot of different studies. Hand somebody a resume, put a woman's name on it, put a man's name on it, especially in a tech area, the woman is not going to seem as good as the man. You can also do this with African sounding names. You can do this with Hispanic sounding names. You can also do it, by the way, with Asian sounding names. Okay, so all of these stereotypes, they play into how we perceive things. And so how do we get around them? As members of the minority group, we have to arm ourselves. As members of the majority group, as members of hiring boards, we have to figure out ways to avoid triggering those implicit biases in ourselves. And sometimes that means blind evaluations, right? You probably have all heard of studies of orchestras, right? Where when they started doing behind a screen auditions for orchestras that were 90% male, all of a sudden, half of the people getting parts were women. It's magic. They got so much better when they were behind the screen. How did that happen? So we can't just like say to ourselves, I'm not going to be biased anymore, because we're all biased. Women are just as biased as men, by the way, about women. It's not like, oh, you men are bad and we women are good, or white people are bad and black people are good. We all have the same sets of biases because we're all from the same culture, to the extent that we're from the same culture, and I know some people are from different cultures. And then the last set of things is kind of the perceptions of computer science. What does a computer scientist do? Well, they sit all alone in a cubicle and they type all day by themselves without talking to anybody. And actually, there are some jobs for people who like to sit all by themselves and type. Isn't that wonderful? Because I know some students who really just want to be by themselves typing code. That's great. But there's so many other kinds of jobs, and a lot of them actually involve talking to people. And if you're not good at talking to people, it might hold you back. So this negative perception is really problematic, not just for gender underrepresentation, but really for the whole field, because we're attracting kinds of people who aren't good at some of the things that we need people to be good at. And by the way, we're hiring people who aren't good at those things because they look like the kinds of people that we think should be good at all of the things, but there's some other things, right? There's teamwork and collaboration and interviewing clients and presenting your work and all of that stuff, and those are different sets of skills, right? But if you hire people through an ordeal, here's the hardest, trickiest problem ever, and you have to find the answer that I'm thinking of, or you're totally wrong and stupid. Well, if you hire people that way, you might get a certain kind of people. And then it's pretty disingenuous to say, oh, diversity, if only we could solve this problem. You have to change what you're doing if you want to change the outcome. And you know, I know you all know about the culture and the whole misogynistic video games, and video games are, by the way, a very, very large percentage of computer science majors get into the field. I mean, when I ask freshmen, how many of you are here because you like to play computer games? I mean, it's like 3/4 of the room raises their hand. This is the driving force behind so many people. And I don't think it's not the right reason to become a computer scientist, but it's a reason to become computer science. Okay, so K-12 education is really important in all of this. And right now, students mostly don't take computer science in K-12. That's not something that we teach our kids. At best, maybe we might have some keyboarding classes, right? Or basic digital literacy. If we're really lucky, our kids might be learning Microsoft Office, probably not Excel, but you know, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, right? So they're ready to go be computer scientists, don't you think? But this is starting to change, and this is a big national conversation that I've become part of. There's a NSF-funded alliance of state-level initiatives called Expanding Computing Education Pathways that's focused on changing teacher training, curriculum, standards, and how students count computer science towards their requirements throughout K-12. And this has to happen at the state level because public education is so distributed in the United States. Every state sets its own standards and its own requirements, so it's very hard to mandate anything at the federal level. So what the federal government is doing is investing in initiatives within states to increase computer science outcomes. And Obama announced a big $4 billion or whatever number it was. They're not going to give him that much, but you know, it says something that there was a big announcement about federal funding for computing education. So this is really important. And teacher preparation is a huge problem if we're going to do this. So if we want kids to start learning computer science, and I do think one of the biggest things we can do to change participation by gender and by race is to have quality computing education for all students in all schools, regardless of where they're located. In Maryland, we did some surveying and looked at who was being taught computer science and where they were. And it's not shocking, right? It's not very many girls, not very many minorities, and also mostly in affluent suburban communities that the classes even exist. So if you're, you know, in a predominantly Hispanic school in Prince George's County, you probably don't even have access, even if you wanted to. You probably don't have access to a decent computer science class. And so we need to figure out how to do that, but there's a big challenge with who's going to teach all those classes if we really start to do that. You know, most of our K-12 teachers don't know very much about computer science because they didn't learn. Now we're back to a chicken and egg problem. And so this is something that a lot of people that we're looking at UMBC, that a lot of people are trying to understand. How do we increase teacher preparation? Okay, so let me skip over some of the initiatives, and I want to mention a couple of sort of key topics. One is the imposter syndrome. How many of you know what the imposter syndrome is? Good, you're not just pretending, right? Right, so the imposter syndrome is, I don't really deserve all the stuff that I've gotten. Like, people think I'm really good at this, but I'm not really good at this. And, you know, I got this job, but I don't think I really deserved it. Get over it. Just, you know, stop doing that to yourself, that negative self-talk that goes on inside your head, because it really holds you back. And men have this too, right? It's really not just women, but it's insidious and it's invasive. And I think one really important thing is to find people that you can relate to. And if there's nobody in your own organization, then find a meetup. You know, but the other thing is talk to them about these kinds of things too. Like, it's great to talk about networking, it's great to talk about technical stuff, that's all really important, but I think it's really important to talk about the other kinds of issues. Like, what is your experience as a woman, as a Black woman? What is your experience in your environment, and finding people who can relate to that experience so that you have sort of a healthy support system around you of understanding your experience and figuring out how to get through it in a healthy sort of way. Another is implicit bias, and I talked about this already. And you know, I already said this, and the thing is, there's not so much overt discrimination against women anymore, I think. I mean, there is, but it's kind of subtle, and a lot of it is just not conscious, right? It's not like intentional. And you know, 20, 30 years ago, it was intentional. It was like, well, women shouldn't do this. And people tend not to say that now, but somewhere inside them, there's a gremlin that's thinking it. And unfortunately, it's inside our heads too. And so we have to figure out ways past that. I like to talk about time management, and I'll just say I would love to talk about time management. So if anybody is struggling with that, that's something that we could maybe talk about in the Q&A session or over a drink afterwards. I do want to mention one thing. So I want to tell one more story before I wrap up. This is about two women who I knew when I was in graduate school in my professional community. And one of them was like one of those super successful people that just has it all, right? You know, she went to top college, she went to one of the top graduate schools. She was working with one, you know, her committee was really impressive people. She went off and got a great job. She was bringing in all kinds of grant proposals, went into academia, was publishing, was getting awards, had tons of money, got tenure, got promoted to full professor super early, just all these terrific things. And you kind of look at somebody like that and it's like, what is she doing right? She must be doing all of those, she must have figured out this implicit bias stuff and all of that. And I had another friend who just kind of was scraping by and started out, didn't get into most of the grad schools. Actually, she just barely got into one grad school of all the schools she applied to. Failed all of her exams the first time she took them, but somehow, like, I don't even know why she stuck it out, but stuck it out, kept going, kind of scraped through, managed to get a thesis together, didn't really know what she was doing, eventually ended up in academia. Almost all of her grant proposals were being rejected. All of her papers were being rejected, and it's like, well, why is this person even trying? Like, at some point, wouldn't you think, this isn't the right place for you? Why don't you maybe find a job where you could be successful? So, okay, the reveal, the secret is, those two people are actually both me. And I can tell my story either way, right? I can tell you about all my successes, and I do. I have a CV that's like the length of your arm, and it's got awards, and it's got papers, and it's got millions of dollars of funding, and it's so awesome. I mean, it really is awesome. But if I were to write down all of my failures and the things I didn't get, it would be way longer than that, like way longer than that. So I feel that I have really a platform to speak about failure because I'm so good at it. I'm so good at it. And here's one of the things that I tell my students a lot. People don't really notice your failures. They certainly don't notice them the way you do. It's like when you look in the mirror and you got a pimple and it's all you can see. Like, your eye just goes right to it. And that's really all you can see when you look in the mirror is that blemish on your face. And everybody else can see it too. They do. I mean, it's there. But that's not what they're looking at. You know, that's not what they pay attention to. They're looking at your eyes. They're looking at your smile. They're looking at your necklace, whatever it is. They're listening to what you're saying. They're not looking at that thing. They're not looking at the thing that you just didn't do. They're looking at the thing that you did. They're wanting to see the thing that you did. And so, you know, when you focus on your failures, it's not a good place to be. You want to learn from them, but everybody fails. And if you're not failing, by the way, you're not trying. That's the big thing I tell my grad students. I'm like, don't be in grad school if you don't want to fail, because if you're not failing, you're not trying. You may as well not be here. You need to try some things that are too hard for you, that are not going to work out. And you have to figure out, like, you have to be right at the edge of what's successful. It's the entrepreneurial mindset, right? Why aren't you starting companies? I'll tell you a secret. I invented cloud computing in 1984. I totally did. I did a software engineering project for my class that my professor said was the best project he'd ever seen. And he was telling us, you should go start a company, you should do this, you should do this. And I'm like, I'm not gonna go start a company. I'm like, I'm graduating and I'm gonna go to get a PhD. Well, I don't even know what you're talking about. I should have started a company. He was right. I should have listened to him. I thought he was just being a silly old man. Anyway, so my gender stereotype of work. Yeah, so here's some advice, and one of the big pieces of advice, and I'm not very good at this, so I like to give it to other people because maybe you'll do better with it than I can, is to learn to take constructive criticism. I hate putting my things out there before I think they're perfect. I hate that because I'm like, I don't want to show you this paper and get feedback on it because I know what's wrong with it already. I know it's not very good. I know everything that's wrong with it. Here's the thing, I don't know everything that's wrong with it. And to the extent that I do, I don't know how to fix it, and somebody else might. And that's the thing, is you have to be willing to share your imperfect ideas with people and hear what they have to say, even if it's like really painful, because that's really the only way you get to the next level. And starting a company, right? You're going to go, how many VC pitches do you have to make before your company gets funded? It's a really humiliating experience, and I know this from people I've talked to, and some of them have started companies that have tanked and went nowhere and never made a cent, and some of them are the co-founders of VMware. You just don't know. You don't know until you try. So embrace failure, because that's where you get your successes from. So thank you for listening, and that's it. You're welcome.
So I have to apologize. I have been awful about keeping time tonight. I'd like to ask Amy we're going to do questions and answers with the speakers. And then on the way out, I'd like to ask if you would hit the buttons. We're trying to survey how many people in Women Data Scientists DC and DRDC live in Virginia, Maryland, and... You should talk about. Oh, right. So we are trying to record how many of our members live in Virginia, Maryland, or DC to try and figure out where to have our meetups. So on the way out, please hit buttons. Remember, we're going to have data drinks at 8 o'clock or around 8 at 6 Engine. And so I will have a microphone and come around for questions. Should we keep using this?
So by the way, my undergrad is in electrical engineering, computer science, and I concur with everything that you've said. And there were about 3 of us.
Yeah. Oh, we have 2. Oh, great. Okay.
All right. Question. Anybody?
Thanks. I was wondering what you think the 3 or 5 most important tools or skills are to have these days, and what is going to make you the most useful to the most people?
So I would say number 1 is curiosity. Number 1 is turning your microphone on. Number 2 is curiosity. So I'm really a really big fan of that continuous learner. With the world changing as much as it is, always really looking for where can you learn the next thing. And when I interview people, that's what I'm really looking for. Not what they've done in the past, but what they're interested in doing in the future.
Yeah. I don't know if you were looking for like specific like technology tools, but I'm not going to answer any of that because I'm completely out of date. I mean, I'm in academia. What do I know? But I think having a problem-solving mentality is really important, and that's what I try to instill into my students. If something's not working, what are the strategies that you can use to try to make it better? And enough of a problem-solving mentality and enough resilience also becomes leadership. So keeping your eyes open to how the world is around you and what could be different, and learning some skills to help you build consensus and get things to change. I just think that kind of leadership and broad problem-solving ability is going to give you success whatever industry you're in and whatever tools you know or don't know.
I had one thing, I don't remember the exact words that you used on one of your slides, but it was along the lines of just step forward and just do it. And I have to highly encourage you to do that. People won't seek you out and say, oh, you're ready for your next thing. That doesn't often happen. It's up to you. Just, how did you say, what were the words?
I don't remember. I could find it though, because all my slides are still right there.
Great words.
You want some, maybe, not there. Not there.
Fake it until you make it.
Fake it till you make it.
Do that.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing up here.
Yeah, I think it's a little embarrassing, actually. It's a little embarrassing to admit how many of the good things and awards I've received, I asked people to nominate me for. But it turns out that's how that works. Like, that's how it works. If there's an award at your company for the best XYZ and you didn't get it and you think, well, why didn't I get that? It's because you didn't go to your manager and say, would you nominate me for that award because I think I deserve it? You know, I mean, that's how it works. People are busy, they're doing their own thing. You have to be your own advocate. I think it's just really, really important. And I started about halfway to tenure, I figured this out. I'm like, oh, if something happens to me that's kind of good, I should tell people about it. like this brilliant flash of insight, you know? I mean, it doesn't sound so brilliant, but I hadn't been doing it for the 30 whatever years before that. So if something good happens to you, find some people about it. Maybe, hopefully people who are influential in your life and can make more of those kinds of things happen, and that just snowballs.
I think we have time for one more question.
Is there a time in your life that you like suddenly know exactly what you're gonna do like in the future, or like?
Not yet.
I mean, I think there are moments, right? There's moments where something presents itself to you, and you say, that is so great. Sometimes you don't say that's so great. You say, oh yeah, that was so great. You know, it's like in the rear view mirror. I hardly know anybody, you know, my age, half a century in, who's doing what they thought they would be doing when they were 20. You know, there's twists and turns and different opportunities present themselves, and you go through one phase and then that plays itself out and then something else comes along, but you just have to stay open to the opportunities and recognize something cool and exciting and different when you see it and seize it. You know, I actually am kind of doing what I thought I would be doing when I was 20. I thought I would be a computer science professor, and I am, but I did some other stuff along the way. And I didn't know if this was ever going to happen, and I didn't know I'd be an associate dean, and I didn't think I was a leader. Like I didn't think I was a leader until I was 40. I never thought of myself that way, and yet I was doing that all along. I just didn't know I was doing it. So I don't think there's a lot of blinding flashes of aha moments for most people.
Yeah, and I would
Sorry.
say two things to that. One is that because everything's changing so much, sometimes when, you know, that question people ask in an interview, what do you want to be doing 5 years from now? I think the appropriate answer these days is the world is changing so much, we don't even know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. So I want to be doing something that's really important. The other aspect to this is find good people that you work with, find good senior people, go to them and offer to do things with them, for them. And really people, it's the network of people, we can't, that's one of the best ways to really figure out how to get to the next step, how to get to the next thing that you really want to do.
I do want to emphasize in my time management thing, this bullet right here, saying yes well and saying no well. What that means is when you see an opportunity like that, proactively go, like you said, and say, I will do that. I'm going to do that. That thing that needs to be done, that's important to me, it's important to you, I'm going to do that. But the number one thing is if you say that, you damn well better follow through. Because if you say I'm going to do that and then you don't do it, you're way worse off than if you just hadn't said anything in the first place. So follow through on your commitments, but that also means figure out the things that aren't going to help you or aren't going to help anybody else around you, and say no to those things. But you have to be smart about how to say no. You have to be doing something more important and say, oh, I'm really doing this more important thing. You don't say it that way, right? But get a mentor who can help you say no. And I've actually mentored a few people where my primary role is that whenever they get asked to do something, they have to come ask me if it's okay. And I sometimes say, no, you shouldn't do that. And then they can go back and say, my mentor said I shouldn't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's like my mom won't let me go to the party, right? I can be the bad guy. So find somebody, who can kind of help you navigate some of those things, because sometimes it's hard to say no or to say yes or to push yourself to do something. But if you have somebody who's got your back and who knows you, who can kind of coach you through some of that, it's so valuable.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you to the students.